time to fly.
Another thing that people might do is add compression on their drum bus, or add compression on their bass bus, or add compression on their instrument bus. And as you can see, I don't do that. I don't compress my buses. Really, the only reason that you'll find that I don't use compression on my buses, sometimes what I'll do often is add saturation on my instrument bus just to add more harmonics. So it acts almost as an exciter. So it's just adding more frequencies, adding more, and then I'll EQ out the bottom and the very top. I'll go ahead and drag that down to 16, 15. I'll use my ears, depending on what type of instruments are playing. And I'll adjust this too. I have this cut set to 130, 125 or so. I might drag this down a little bit more, maybe go even higher, like 150, 160, just depending on the mix and the instruments that I have playing. But basically, all we're doing is, I would say this. So you guys might be wondering what Orbit is. Orbit is a transient processor. I throw this on my drums. I just boost the transients just a little bit. I might do more, do less, just depending. Again, just use your ears. Anytime you're using a transient processor, just to get those hits a little sharper. So that's something that might clean up your drums a little bit as well. But the reason that I don't use compression, some people would even consider this as a form of compression, because I think technically it is. Basically, the sound that comes after the initial attack of the drums gets compressed. So technically this is a compressor, but really it's not the type of compression that you would use on a bus in general, because a lot of people have heard of Cytomix, the glue, which is a stock compressor in Ableton, the glue compressor. The job of that is to actually make everything sound more cohesive in a mix. It'll make it actually sound like it's all coming from one source, one place. And there are other ways to do that. And I actually do that through my reverbs. When you use reverbs like this. Now, if you're adding a reverb on your snare and then a different reverb on your hi-hats and then a different reverb on your lead instrument, that's not glue. You're actually doing the opposite. You're making things sound even more separated. When you're using send effects like this, where you're sending all of your instruments into the same reverb and then adjusting the level of those sounds going into each reverb. So say I have this pluck, I have this set to 87%. These bells, they're set to 32%. Well, what that's doing is it's actually sending these sounds into the same reverb room, but those percentages are making you hear those sounds either further or closer inside of that room. So that's the difference between using a send effect, a send reverb versus an insert reverb. Because if you have different settings on your reverb, so say for example, if I pull up this reverb and I have this decay set to 3.4 seconds on one reverb, and then I have it set to 0.8 seconds, and I have the size turned up on one, size turned down on another, diffusion you're literally creating different rooms, different spaces. So that's actually going to do the opposite of glue. So again, there are other ways to glue your mix together than compression. And really the only reason I would use compression is when I'm dealing with an overly dynamic sound, which is really rare because I use VSTs, and most VSTs, you're controlling the dynamics through the sound envelopes. If you're getting a really dynamic sound through there, it's because you're doing something really weird. The only time I deal with really overly dynamic sounds is with recorded sounds. So that means a vocal or recorded guitars, recorded drums, recorded piano. Those are going to be overly dynamic, where the sound's louder and lower and certain notes don't sound as loud. That's another thing about recording inside of a DAW. We have a piano roll where we can adjust the velocities on our own. So I can make all of these volumes exactly the same. So, I mean, you have to ask yourself, why are you compressing? You want to use the tools that are needed when they're actually necessary. Don't compress just to compress, just to say that, hey, I added a compressor, it should be better now. 9 times out of 10, if you're doing that, you're probably messing up your mix. And again, the only time that I would be using a compressor is with recorded sounds, sounds that are just overly dynamic, where you need compression, where you need to make the sound more consistent overall. I don't use it for glue. I use other things for glue, like reverb, saturation, distortion, EQing is a form of glue by having certain sounds in certain frequency ranges. That acts as a form of glue as well. Leveling, that's another form of glue. Having the sounds balanced to where it does sound like they belong together. That's another form of glue too. So really compression really should be a last resort, if even an option at all. If you're making beats 100% in the box, I wouldn't be using compression. I'm just telling you that now. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, and that's fine. I mean, you can go ahead and listen to my beats versus theirs. And if you like their beats better, go ahead and go with what they're telling you and use compression because that's the sound that you like. But if that's not the case, save yourself the time, save yourself the headache of compressing things for no reason, because I think a lot of you guys are over compressing, and that's just the reality of it, because it's really easy to do. So here's another thing that you should keep in mind. Compressing is literally making your sound smaller. That's one thing that people forget. People think that it's making your sounds louder, but that's because of the gain knob. That's because of the volume knob that you use at the end. So really, you're literally making a sound smaller, and then you're just turning up the volume. That's literally what a compressor is doing. It's taking all those loud sounds and it's turning them down, making them smaller, and then you're using that gain knob at the end, or the makeup gain at the end, to make it loud again. That end result can be the opposite of what you want. I remember back in the day, that was a huge issue with a lot of people's drums. Like, they would compress those individual drum sounds thinking that they need compression. So you would hear these really tiny snare drums and really tiny hi-hats and really tiny kicks. And you could just hear that they're just over compressed. Like, even though they're loud, but you could almost visually see like a tiny snare drum, even though it's loud and piercing. So again, unless you're recording drums, recording a guitar, recording instruments, recording vocals, and bringing that into your DAW, and you need to control those dynamics, I really wouldn't be using compression. I would look more towards saturation, look more towards EQ, reverbs, and leveling out your instruments, and you're just going to end up with a better master. But yeah, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment down below if you have any questions, and I will see you guys in the next one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Take care. Peace.